What have you noticed in cutting up clips for shorts that really gets a video to go viral?
I would say there are three main things. Number one, the guest does help a lot. But if it's not the guest that's a famous creator, entrepreneur, or whatever, if the guest is talking about a famous creator, a famous brand, a famous book, famous author, that also helps a lot. So you're borrowing from someone else's attention and you're bringing it into your clip. That helps a ton. The second one, but for me, it's the most important thing, is if you're creating an emotional reaction to your viewer. So for Danny, for example, his most viral clips has been the clips that have created either controversy or that have made the viewer feel something, felt inspired or felt sad or whatever. Like getting an emotional reaction from your viewer is one of the biggest things you can do right now in order to get a lot of views on your clips. For example, let's say, I don't know if you've seen Zap Pograf's clips or Maximise.
I've seen them.
Okay, so there are two.
Yeah, I've seen Maximise. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Maximise has done this beautifully. Like he borrows from other people's fame or from famous people's attention. Like for example, a famous movie, a famous singer. He takes those clips and then he mashes an inspirational message. So you're bringing those two things, and with amazing editing, like he's a great artist. He mixes those up, and those go viral every single day. Like I think he's almost at 1 million views, 1 million followers in just like 6 months. So if you do those
absurd
two
growth.
things, yeah, it's absurd. But he knows it, and his strategy is pretty great. And the third one, the person who's talking, the host or whatever, is a great storyteller. They know how to tell a great story in a short amount of time. Let's say like 20 to 30 seconds. And someone that does this really well is Shaan Puri from My First Million. If you look at, or Sam Parr as well, but if you look at their most viral clips, they're telling stories. They're not saying like, hey, here's how you become rich. They tell a story about someone who became rich by doing a wild thing, an interesting thing. So tell great stories, get your viewers to get emotional by triggering some emotion. Might be sometimes by creating controversy, sometimes by making them feel inspired by your content, and also borrowing from someone else's attention.
From a podcast, like some of these are like hours long. How do you figure out like which ones you want to do, right? You could do unlimited short form clips, right? You could probably edit like 10, 20 of them. So how many are you guys doing? And B, how do you know when to stop? And after you've decided, okay, like we want to do this many, how are you going and like finding them? Because there's like so many options. Could you like walk me through that, I guess like tactically that like process? Who figures it out and like how do you go about actually putting it together?
Yeah, so when I first got the raw footage from Danny, I listened to the whole thing. And while I'm listening to it, I'm searching for something that the guest or Danny said that could be a great hook. That's the main thing. If there isn't a great hook, I'm not even questioning if this is going to be a clip or not. If he has one of those three things that I just told you about, then I mark it. I edit in Premiere, so then I hit M, and it marks the clip in the timeline. And sometimes there could be 10 clips, 20 clips, 3 clips. We don't think like, oh, we need to take 20 clips from this podcast. We're just looking at, okay, are there going to be great clips from this? If there are not, if there's only like one clip, then perfect. Just take one clip. But if there are 20 clips, we'll do 20 clips. And I think it's the reps as well. When you're starting to edit podcasts and I've edited like almost 200 podcasts by now. So you get like this feeling, that's the intuition, like, okay, this is going to be a great clip. So yeah, the reps also count. And
you talked about like creating controversy or videos that have controversy or videos that have like a strong opinion or a story or something like that. Besides that, like when you're identifying the hook to use, is there like a science behind it? Like,
Give me a second. I'll look one clip and maybe we can use this as an example. As a practical, tactical example. For this clip that I'm showing you got 70K views, which is a pretty good clip. And the hook was, why do so many men have heart attacks? Right? That's a great hook. That's a question, which questions are really great hooks as well. Might be a controversial topic as well, or a topic that might evoke an emotional reaction as well, because a man having heart attacks, well, that's something that some people have either experienced or have someone else in their families experienced that as well. So from that, I saw that I took it and I was like, okay, this is a great hook. Now, the next, I think, 20 seconds or so, I just cut it down to where he says like, the men have heart attacks because their hearts are so closed. And that's a controversial take. Like, he's selling something that's like, most people would think that's a bit outrageous as well. Like, why? Most people have heart attacks because they're obese or they suffer from heart conditions. But no, he's saying something that most people haven't heard about before about like heart attacks. So yeah, question is a great way. And for this clip is another great way. Danny's biggest most viral clip was this guy, John Fio. He talking about when he goes to Italy, he eats really badly and he feels great. But when he goes back to America, he tries to eat healthy, but he feels really, really bad. And his take was like, it's the water. How the food in Italy is cooked with great water and America's water is really bad. And that got people in the comment section really mad. I don't know why, but people started sharing it. People started like saying, oh, he's nuts. And so people are saying like, oh yeah, I went to Italy and I felt great. So that was a take as well that no one else has heard before. And it started with a question as well. It's like, yeah, why when I go to Italy, I feel great and I eat pigs all the time. And when I go back to America, I eat like a salad, but I feel really bad. So a question might be also a great way to do it. Like for you in the podcast, a great question might be, let's say you ask me, hey, what's Alex Hormozi's content strategy that got him so famous, right? That's a question you're borrowing from someone else who's famous, and you're asking a question that might be really valuable for people who want to grow on social media.
I guess related to this, I saw you tweet out how he takes some of his like tweets and then just turns them into like Instagram reels and then does that. Walk me through why you think that format does really well. And then I guess we can talk about like other formats that you are interested in and, you know, think will do really well over the next like few months.
Right now, Instagram is pushing two metrics: watch time and shares. And when people just post an image as a reel, the watch time on that reel that's 3 seconds long is like is like 200%. And now images are really easy to share. Let's say like it's an Alex Hormozi saying that you should work until your eyes bleed. He hasn't said that, but let's say that he does that. People who feel that way, they just read 3 lines and they share it on their stories or they share it to a friend. It's so easy to share an image because you don't have to watch a 60-second clip or a 30-second clip. You just read it in like 2 seconds and you share it in your stories and you share it to your friends. And Instagram is loving that. And if you look at Alex Hormozi right now, he's not just posting tweets right now. He's posting images that his team is creating and they're doing magic numbers. Now, you need to be careful because he can do that because he has created like a big audience and people know who he is. But if you're just creating images and you're not putting like either your face or your take on it, you're just creating content to produce views, but you're not creating followers or creating people who actually want to follow you because of your content. So you're just, if you're just chasing views, then you're just going to waste like all the engagement. So you need to be tactical. You need to think really how you're going to create those images and post them.
So you're saying like images as reels, you're saying, or is this like something else?
Images as a reel. Just go into CapCut, go into Premiere, put an image as a video, make it last like 3 to 5 seconds, and post that as a reel on Instagram. And it will perform really well right now.
Related to this, where do you see, you talked about podcasting, taking them and turning them into clips. That's a lot of effort for a lot of people.
It does.
And for a lot of brands, that just doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Like if you're selling something like direct to consumer, it just makes no sense for you to have a podcast. Time it takes to produce a podcast, turn it into clips, and do it right versus the return in terms of like views or impressions or whatever they're like going towards. Do you think it's just better to just only do like, create shorts from scratch? Like what do you think it is?
The idea matters the most on YouTube, on short form, on newsletters, on tweets, or whatever. The idea you're trying to give the world or tell people, whatever matters the most. If you're going to start a podcast, then you should definitely think about the strategy before hitting record. So that's going to be the question you're going to ask. If this question that I'm going to ask my guest, does it have a chance of going viral on short form? If you want to leverage that, is the content or is the overall theme of the podcast episode something that a lot of people are interesting, or the target audience I want to reach are interesting in? And also, am I presenting this in a different way than everyone else? Because podcasts are great because they're easy to do, but because of that, there's a lot of competition. And the only way to stand out is not only by asking great questions, but to find a way to be different, to go to one extreme, maybe change your background where you're recording, or maybe ask wild questions. Like for example, Danny, one of the things that made him blow up was because he was, for a while, was known as the research guy.
Mm-hmm.
And because people thought he was like a mixture of Nadwar with Sean Evans from Hot Ones. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason he got Alex Hormozi on the show as well. Like he wasn't getting that many views, but because he was known as the research guy, he stood up from the crowd of all the other podcasts that they made interviews. So the idea or the way you want to stand out in this red ocean that might be podcasts with guests, it's to find a way so it's the question I'm going to ask do they have great hooks? Can they go viral? Or is my target audience as well interested in them? And also how I'm going to stand out.
Going back to, you mentioned like compilation edits. I've seen you do like a few of them. And I've also seen, Maximise, like you said, like does really, really good ones. Where do you see that like space going? It is pretty limited, like who can do it, right? You got to be like pretty talented, and not just talented, but you have to be like very creative and, have like a unique twist onto it. Do you think people will see Maximise as success and it might, also get pretty saturated and kind of like overwhelming in that space? Or do you think there's areas for, brands or people to explore those kinds of edits? Yeah, I guess I'm just curious like what your opinion on is for in that like niche is, because I've seen you do them and they're pretty good too, so.
Thank you. Yeah, so this like a Maximise created like a new format, a new trend for short form. And there are a lot of people right now copying him, like being direct copies. And if you're trying to be a direct copy of Maximise, it might get you followers, but it's not a great way to grow. So compilation works because what I've told you, like you get a bunch of famous actors or singers or whatever, and you create this big amazing masterpiece from it. The way I did it is like I borrow from Maximise, but I also put myself in it, and I
I've seen
showed
that,
my face, and I talked to the camera, and I gave my take. That's a great way to stand out.
You're getting a lot of hours of footage pretty much, right? How do you decide what to keep and what not to keep? I guess like what's your opinion? I've seen videos where people discuss and say that, they take like 3 hours of footage and then they cut it down into like an hour and a half, right? And they are very brutal about what to keep. Do you guys do that? Do you keep everything? How does it work? Like walk me through like what the selection criteria is or your thought process.
Yeah, well, with Dan especially, he doesn't like to cut anything out. And
Okay.
that's another way. Yeah, he doesn't. And that's a way he actually differentiates from a bunch of podcasts that are overly edited. That's not being said that's the right way to do it, but people have loved the way we do the podcast because he leaves like 40 to 30 seconds pauses. Like now, if you're trying to optimize, especially if you're trying to optimize YouTube and maybe not Spotify, then yeah, definitely try to cut down those awkward pauses and try to make things more to have like a great flow, because videos should have like a great flow. But podcast, the great thing about podcast is like people feel it and see it. If they're just hearing it, listening to it, they feel like they're in the room with us, and it's just two bros, the boys having a conversation with each other. So it depends, and as I told you, it's like, it depends. Just do what feels right for you. If you're trying to optimize, then yeah, cut it down. Look for the great parts. Cut the things that I messed up. Do all those stuff. It truly will make your video have a better watch time on YouTube, and maybe people won't stop listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice. I guess it also matters because Danny's podcast is very like deeper topics, like you mentioned, and like about like how people think through problems and how they think about like life in general. So it is weird if you cut those parts out. Does that make sense? Yeah. Whereas like if it's more, like you said, if you're optimizing for watch time, and especially if you're trying to like create it shorter, it doesn't make sense to keep as much. All right, last question that I got for you is, when it comes to editing podcasts, what are most people doing wrong in that sense? Anybody can just take a mic and start a show, right? Anybody can just like, come on Riverside and like hit record. So like, I guess like what separates the fact that anybody can do it from the top 1% in terms of editing?
And I've seen it, and I've seen this done a lot of times. They over edit their podcast. They think they edit their podcast as if it was a TikTok clip. So they add a bunch of captions, a bunch of effects. They want to, because they're anxious that people might tune out. But the beautiful thing about podcasts is that most people listen to them while they're driving, while they're doing chores or whatever. And if you can make the conversation or the podcast feel as real as humanly possible and not add all these sound effects, all these visual effects, that's the best way. If you can make the listener or the viewer feel like they're right there with you, that's how you win. Not because I've seen podcasts that they make the intros do matter, but they make this Diary of the CEO type of intros for their podcast.
Yeah.
They work, but they don't work because of the effects they're doing or all the captions they put it in. No, they're putting the best things that are going to happen in the podcast. You can see like a Colin and Samir intro, a Colin and Samir podcast intro, and a Diary of the CEO podcast intro. They're widely different in terms of editing, visual effects, sound effects, but I'm pretty sure they're getting the same results. And Colin and Samir are pretty chilled down because they're just pretty chill. So you're just bringing the best stuff from the hour-long podcast to the first minute, but they don't over-edit everything. So yeah, don't over-edit. It should feel like a regular conversation between two people. But most of podcasts they've gone so popular, whatever, not because of the intros, not at all. They're like a good 10%, but that's not the 80-20. The 80-20 of podcast is the idea, the guest, and the topics. That's the 80-20. If you can do those three things really well, the intro won't matter a lot. Won't matter. So just focus on those three things.